Namaskar, Nilesh Oak here. In this Breaking Evidence series, today I'm going to discuss another set of evidence which is very decisive in supporting, corroborating, and validating 5561 BCE as the year of the Mahabharata War. Now, to discuss this evidence, we need to look at three different aspects. One is geography of the time of the Mahabharata, and then the anthropology aspect, specifically how many people participated in the war, how does that number look as a percentage of the total population of the world, total population of the area that was affected by the Mahabharata War. And the third aspect is the genetics evidence. All right. Now, to do this, I am going to discuss these three aspects, that is the geography, anthropology, and genetics. My hope is that I can do it, this whole discussion, in one part, but if it appears that it's getting longer, then I will split it into two or possibly three parts. Okay. So with that, let me share the screen and share my PowerPoint presentation. All right, so let's begin with the ancient geography. Now, number of you would have already seen my presentation, in fact, multiple presentations given at multiple places on Sugriva's Atlas. Now, that was based on the evidence from Valmiki Ramayana, and it describes how much and how far Sugriv knew about world geography 14,000 years ago. And then I want to quickly get to the Mahabharata geography. All right, so that sets the context as to who participated into the Mahabharata War. This is also important because many times when I have discussed the genetics evidence, if people don't know this background, then they are again stuck only in the geography aspect. Okay, as to where is the Central Asia, did they participate, what is meant by Far East, what is meant by East Asia, what is meant by Middle Eastern countries, what is meant by India of the Mahabharata time, and so on. All right, we can begin with the background knowledge that 5561 BCE as was the year of Mahabharata War. Now, why do we say that? Because we did not arrive at this number based on the genetics evidence. Okay, we did not arrive at this evidence based on archaeological evidence. We did not arrive at this number based on either anthropology or geography evidence. We did arrive at this year based on all the astronomy evidence of the Mahabharata text, internal to Mahabharata text, and then each observation was objectively tested in a scientific fashion, and all the observations and their inferences were put together in a logical fashion to arrive at this 5561 BCE. So we begin with this as the reality, and then now look for the corroborative evidence coming from genetics. This is the beauty of this scientific framework, scientific method. All right. What I mean by that is it has this three corners, triangulation of explanation, that is evidence, prediction, that's anuman, and testing, which is pratyaksha. And it does not matter at which corner point we begin. All right. So, for example, here, one of the realities of the Mahabharata war, for example, one of the realities of the Mahabharata war are that a significant male population died during this war. All right. It's estimated to be 18 aukshahini. And in anthropology portion of this discussion, we will look at what that aukshahini means in terms of number of men fighting. Now, we have to ask the question, is there any evidence that is anthropological in nature, for example, anthropological genetics and such, that is objectively testable? And the anuman or the inference is to see, was there any effect on the population, and was that discernible, and were we lucky to have that evidence? That's something we have our hands on. Because the year is 5561 BCE, broadly I am saying the evidence has to match the 6th millennium BCE, and possibly its after effects, and therefore post 6th millennium BCE. And again, depending on the nature of evidence, we would look at background knowledge of geography, genetics, and physical anthropology. What would be the background knowledge is usually not clear until we know what kind of evidence is available. Okay. Now, in this case, before my presentation, I already know what I'm going to discuss, and therefore I know the background of geography, genetics, and physical anthropology would be the relevant background knowledge. All right. So let's begin with Ramayana geography. As I said, I have given a separate talk on Sugriva's Atlas. So quickly, all I want to say here is that 14,000 years ago, at the time of Ramayana, at least Sugriva knew the world geography as shown here. In the east direction, beginning with India, he knew the geography all the way to South America, at least the west coast of South America, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, that area, and also he knew about Andes. In fact, he describes that as a Udaya Parvata. Okay, so in the east direction, the geography was known until South America. In the south direction, Sugriva gives detailed descriptions of the land through the ocean, of course, all the way to Antarctica. And in the west direction, he describes different mountain ranges, different areas of the world, which, based on the description, we can match all the way to Alps. And in the north direction, Sugriva describes the landmass going from India, starting with India, all the way to the Arctic Sea. All right, so that is what was known during the Ramayana time. All right, so the area that is highlighted is what Sugriva tends to describe, possibly with the exception of North America. Also, the area that Sugriva does not describe is this middle portion of the Atlantic. Okay, at least there are no clear descriptions that we can match with the descriptions of Atlantic. All right. Now, there is a genetic trail that shows a trail starting from India and going through the eastern part of Asia, through Thailand, Laos, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and through the Polynesia, parts of Australia, all the way to South America and entire South America. Okay, and this trail is very, very old. In fact, now we have studies that show that there was a human habitation, human activity in South America for a very long time. For example, locations such as Monteverde in Chile uh, takes us back to human habitation timeline to that of like 30,000 BCE plus. And a few other studies from Panama, the Central America, takes us to 50,000 BCE. All right. So in the south direction, Sugriva talks all the way to Antarctica. In the west direction, Sugriva talks of the landmass, many mountain ranges, and you can see that in the map, by the way. Also, just to note down, the Black Sea here, as we see it today, actually did not exist 14,000 years ago. Okay. Interesting location I should mention because that has a relevance for Mahabharata. It also has anthropological relevance in the context of Mahabharata. It also has relevance for the genetics data. For example, right in the Ramayana times, the location is mentioned in the westward direction, and the name is that Prag Jyotishpur. Okay, so Prag Jyotish. This is Tatra Prag Jyotisham Nama Jata Rupa Mayampuram Yasmin Vasati Dushta Atma Narako Nama Danava. So that Narakasur that is familiar to many was in this place Prag Jyotish, and it was in the west direction. Just note that down. In my presentation on Sugriv Atlas, I have conjectured that this Prag Jyotishpur was nothing but modern day Baghdad in Iraq. And I'll come to that at some point, why I say that. Okay. It, of course, it went by the name Prag Jyotishpur or Prag Jyotish. Why I'm mentioning this? Because based on the Purana narratives, we have this feeling, we have this information that the Prag Jyotishpur of Narakasur or Naraka was in the eastern part of India, near Assam or part of Assam somewhere. If you try to dig it down, you will find that yes, even people of Assam make an assumption like that, and they might point to certain places as Prag Jyotishpur. And that could be true, by the way, for various reasons. But as far as the Ramayana is concerned, it is definitely talking of at least a Prag Jyotish connected with the Naraka in the westward direction. All right, we are going to see this repeated when we get to the Mahabharata geography evidence. Okay, if we are still in the Ramayana descriptions, if we continue to follow westward, then there are many other descriptions, and finally it ends up with Alps. In Ramayana times, it is called Astagiri, okay, kind of a place where sun sets. And Sugriva mentions that I don't know of the land beyond this place. Okay, so that's the west direction. All right, in the north direction, Sugriva again describes the landmass beginning with central India and through Kailas, through Manas Sarovar, and through Uttara Kuru, Uttara Madra, and then talks of the areas all the way to the Arctic Sea. Now Sugriva doesn't ask his Vanara parties to either go to the Arctic Sea or either go to Antarctica, but he describes the landmass. All right. For example, a good description in the northern direction is that of the Uttara Payasam Nidhi, that's the Uttara Samudra, that is referring to the Arctic Sea. The area is described as the land of Devas, okay, but it is also described as a Visuryo, okay. However, even when the sun is not present, and that is a fact, for a significant portion of time, some portion in the northern hemisphere and also in the southern hemisphere near the polar regions. But there is a description of the northern lights, aurora borealis, for example. Now, why do I mention this? Because the same description also gets repeated in the Mahabharata. All right. So let's talk about the Mahabharata geography quickly. This is the Mahabharat War. And if we look at only focus on the portion of India, very, very close to India, okay? So that will include modern day Pakistan and Afghanistan and Bangladesh, parts of Myanmar, and of course, Sri Lanka, okay? So that's the area where most of the warriors came and participated into the Mahabharat War. Having said that, there were warriors who came with their army from the extended portion of India. And just to show you what that area looked like, I'm going to take you to the time of Rajasuya Yajna of Yudhishthir. If the specific chapters, if you would like to study, they occur in Sabha Parva. And if you are referring to the Bhandarkar Oriental's critical edition, then the chapters 23 through 29. In Gita Press edition, the chapters numbers will slightly change. Okay, they might begin before around that 23 and might go up to 30, 31, and so on. What do we know? The four Pandava brothers, except Yudhishthir, they go to conquer the place, tame the kings, get them to agree for Yudhishthira's status as the Samrat or Chakravarti, and agree to pay taxes to Yudhishthir. And so these four brothers go in the four different directions, starting with Indraprastha or Hastinapur. Arjun goes in the north direction. Now, please understand slight difference from Ramayana times to Mahabharata times. Some of the portions that were covered by Sugriv as part of the west direction are covered in Mahabharata as part of the north direction, at least in the sense of Arjuna's expedition to that north direction. And part of the areas that were covered in the north direction in Valmiki Ramayana are also covered here in the north direction. So some things can change, okay? Sometimes can also be depending on the reference point. For example, again, I'm not saying that is the reason, but we need to understand the context. In the case of Mahabharata, the starting point is Indraprastha or Hastinapur, which is think of near modern day New Delhi. On the other hand, when Sugriva was describing, he was already in the south, which is think of as a northern Karnataka. Okay, so that might have caused these changes. We don't know the reason, but it's important that we understand and recognize the slight differences while describing the geography in the Ramayana versus Mahabharata. All right, so Arjun is going in the north direction. Now, please go ahead and read these chapters. The descriptions that you're going to see are the way it is shown in the map, which is to say, yes, it describes the north direction, it describes Kailas, it describes Mansarovar, it describes all the way to the Arctic Sea, but it also describes many portions in the west direction, at least the way Sugriva had described. For example, it refers to Pragjyotishpur again, okay? And remember, by the Mahabharata times, the Pragjyotishpur, is associated with King Bhagadatta. Now, do you know what is interesting? I had discussed this in the Sugriva Atlas, but I would like to repeat it because it's very relevant. The place called Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq, the modern day capital, if you see how the Iraqis say it, and you can go and check this on the Wikipedia or search for how Baghdad is said on Google, and you will find the way they say it is Bagada, 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 okay, as if like Bhagadatta, but that last ta part is missing. This is very interesting because in the Mahabharata times, Pragjyotish or Pragjyotishpur is identified in the west/north direction where Arjuna went, and the place is identified with King Bhagadatta. In fact, Arjuna goes and meets King Bhagadatta. The important point I want to make is that same Bhagadatta with his army does participate into the Mahabharata war, and there are many other warriors from that area who also participate into the Mahabharata war. Anyways, so Arjuna goes there, meets the kings, tames the kings, gets an agreement that they will pay tax to the Yudhishthir and acknowledge Yudhishthir as a Samrat, and then he comes back. Beam goes in the eastern direction. Okay, so the areas that are referred to is like a Mithila, so parts of Bihar, and then Wangadesh, which is Bengal, and so on. And then there are many other kingdoms described, possibly going to Myanmar, and it's not very clear, but therefore I have drawn that possibly it could go up to say Laos and parts of Thailand and so on and so forth. We don't have a clear distinction or clear descriptions for that. Interestingly, now Nakul, again starting with the Hastinapur Indraprastha, is kind of taking that slice there. Okay, going to sort of north of Saurashtra, very interesting. Definitely going through Panchanad, okay, that area. Going further west, okay, some mountainous regions and whatnot, some ocean-related areas, okay, islands, Dvipa it says in the oceans, so that's possibly the area. And yes, there are very specific description, Baldika and Cambodge and so on. So definitely, if you are interested, do read them. So it's a relatively small slice, at least it appears geographically speaking. That is the region where Nakul goes, and it is described as a west direction in the Mahabharata. Now the last one is the south region, and Sahadev goes in this area. Very interestingly, the parts of modern day Rajasthan is described. So is the Saurashtra. So is the Narmada area, and modern day Maharashtra. Then going down to Karnataka, which is the area of Kishkinda, and the descendants of Sugriva or Angada or whoever, they are still there. At least that's how the descriptions are, and he meets with them. Okay, and they friendly in a friendly fashion they offer the cooperation and so on. There is a description, just actually 2 lines, especially in the Bhandarkar Oriental, but if you go to Gita Press, you will find extended descriptions which are taken from the southern edition of the Mahabharata. So 2 versions. One is the critical edition simply says that Vibhishan, okay, now it won't be the Vibhishan of the Ramayana times, but a subsequent descendant of Vibhishan, still known as a Vibhishan, he agrees and cooperates and gives the best wishes for Sugriva's Rajasuya Yajna. But it comes as just 2 lines. If you go to the Gita Press version and the portions from the southern edition, there is this big description, a slightly different story, and it would be very interesting to study what different Mahabharata text has this version and if there are any variations. Where Sahadev actually invites, makes a call to Ghatotkacha, Bhima's son. Okay, Ghatotkacha the Rakshasa, that is how he's described. Ghatotkacha comes, meets Sahadeva. Sahadeva explains him his task, and on behalf of Sahadeva, Ghatotkacha goes to Lanka, meets Vibhishan, and gets that approval. Okay, how he goes to Lanka is not described. Okay, but anyways, so there is this the different story. Why this is important? Because this has huge implications for the location of Ravana's Lanka, but also what happened to Ravana's Lanka. For example, like many of us right now believe and assume that the Sri Lanka is Ravana's Lanka. Now, that could be true, by the way, but as many of you would know, that Sri Lanka as a name is given very recently, 1972. Before that, it was known as a Simvaladweep, Sarandip, and so on. Even going back 2000 years into the Greek records, you can see uh, the Greek records referring to Lanka as a separate place, and then Taproban, like that is the area of a Tamraparni river, possibly as a separate area, and Simvaladweep or Serendip as a separate area. Again, Greeks called it by slightly different name. So therefore, the question is open as to where exactly was Ravana's Lanka. And if it is not Sri Lanka, and if it was somewhere else, which we have every reason to believe based on numerous descriptions of Lanka in many texts of India, but especially the astronomy text of India. My point is, therefore, the fact the vagueness with which Vibhishan's Lanka is described in Mahabharata becomes significant. To the extent one may ask, did Ravana's Lanka exist during the Mahabharata time? Okay. And if it existed then when exactly it disappeared? Because if we can find out that it did exist then and now it doesn't exist, at least at the location marked as a 0 0, that is 0 latitude 0 longitude, that is right on the equator, and passing through the prime meridian that went through Lanka, but also many other places, but especially Kurukshetra and Ujjain or Avanti. All right. So that's why that description is important. Now, from a geography perspective, think of this area, what I'm showing you right now, is the area from which many kings with their armies participated into the Mahabharata war. All right. So I think I went for close to 30 minutes. So I think it's a better idea to stop here. I am going to, this is part one. I'll stop here. And in the next part, I will talk about the Mahabharata anthropology, and either I will combine the anthropology with genetics evidence, or I will have genetics evidence as part three. So please wait for part two on Mahabharata anthropology.